In the silent cemetery, a black billionaire collapsed before his daughter's grave, his shoulders trembling as though his heart had been torn in two. Tears fell onto the cold stone, dissolving into wordless despair. But he didn't know, just a few yards away, behind the shadow of an old oak tree, the 9-year-old girl everyone believed was dead stood watching him, shivering, alive, carrying a secret that could destroy everything. If he knew his daughter had survived 6 months of captivity, would it be a miracle or the beginning of a new nightmare? John Harrison had built an empire from nothing. The son of a factory worker and a school janitor, he had clawed his way through poverty, discrimination, and doubt to become one of the most successful black real estate developers in America. Harrison Estate now owned commercial properties in 12 states, and his name appeared regularly in Forbes and Business Insider. But none of that mattered anymore. 6 months ago, a fire had consumed the guest house on his property. By the time firefighters arrived, there was nothing left but ashes and the charred remains of what investigators believed was his 9-year-old daughter, Isabella. The official report called it an electrical accident. The funeral was attended by over 500 people, and John Harrison, the man who had conquered every obstacle in his path, had been destroyed. He had lost 30 pounds since the funeral. His once powerful frame now seemed hollow, his designer suits hanging loose on shoulders that had forgotten how to stand straight. He hadn't been to the office in months. His brother Mark had taken over day-to-day operations, while his wife Stella managed the household and made sure he ate, slept, and took his medication. Every Saturday morning, without fail, John drove to Oakwood Cemetery. He would kneel before the small marble headstone that bore his daughter's name, and he would weep. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. The groundskeepers had learned to leave him alone. This Saturday was no different. The autumn air carried the smell of dying leaves as John lowered himself onto the grass, his knees pressing into the cold earth. He traced the letters carved into the stone. Isabella Grace Harrison, beloved daughter, forever 9. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Daddy's so sorry he couldn't save you." What John didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that the daughter he mourned was not dead. She was standing behind an oak tree less than 20 feet away, watching him cry. Isabella had been held captive for 6 months in an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods, nearly 2 hours from the city. Her prison was a small room with a mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, and a window that had been nailed shut. A man she knew only as the guard brought her food twice a day and locked the door behind him. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where she was. All she knew was that she had been taken from her bed the night of the fire, drugged, and brought to this place. For months, Isabella had studied every detail of her captivity. She learned that the guard drank heavily on Saturday nights, often passing out before midnight. She memorized the sounds of his footsteps, the rhythm of his snoring, the location of every creaky floorboard between her room and the back door. She was only 9 years old, but 6 months of fear had sharpened her mind in ways no child should ever experience. 3 weeks ago, she had found the key. The guard had dropped it while drunk, and it had slid under the door into her room. Isabella had hidden it beneath her mattress, waiting for the right moment. Last night had been that moment. She had slipped out through the back door while the guard snored in his chair, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. Then she had run. Through the dark woods, branches scratching her face and arms, her bare feet bleeding on rocks and roots. She had no phone, no map, no idea where she was going. But she remembered the route from the few times she had been moved. The shape of the hills, the distant sound of highway traffic, the position of the stars. By dawn, she had reached the edge of the city. Exhausted, starving, and terrified, Isabella had only one thought: find her father. But she couldn't go home. During her captivity, she had overheard things. fragments of phone conversations between the guard and someone he called the boss. A woman's voice on speakerphone, cold and businesslike. Isabella had recognized that voice. It belonged to Stella, her stepmother. And one conversation, just 2 weeks ago, had revealed everything. "He's getting weaker," the guard had reported. "The medication is working. A few more months, maybe less." "Good," Stella had replied. "Once he's gone, we inherit everything. Just make sure the girl stays hidden. We might need her later." Isabella didn't fully understand what medication meant in this context, but she understood enough. Her father was being poisoned. Her stepmother and someone else, she didn't know who, were killing him slowly, and they were keeping her alive as some kind of insurance. She couldn't go to the police. She was 9 years old, covered in dirt and scratches with no proof of anything. They would call Stella, they would send her home, and then she would disappear again, this time forever. So Isabella had come to the only place she knew her father would be, the cemetery where he believed she was buried. Now, hiding behind the oak tree, she watched him sob. The man who had once seemed invincible, who had carried her on his shoulders and promised to protect her from anything, looked broken beyond repair. His shoulders shook with each cry. His hands trembled as they touched the cold stone. Isabella felt her own tears falling. She wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him and tell him she was alive. But fear held her back. What if someone was watching? What if Stella had people following her father? What if revealing herself meant death for both of them? She stood frozen, caught between terror and love. Then her father said something that shattered her hesitation. "I can't do this anymore, Isabella," John whispered to the grave. "I can't keep living without you. Maybe it's time I join you." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Her father wanted to die. He was giving up. And if she didn't act now, she might lose him forever. Not to Stella's poison, but to his own despair. She stepped out from behind the tree. "Daddy!" The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but in the silence of the cemetery, it carried like a thunderclap. John's body went rigid. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. He had heard that voice in his dreams every night for 6 months. He had imagined it in crowds, in empty rooms, in the quiet moments before sleep. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Slowly, he turned, and there she was, thin, dirty, her hair matted and her clothes torn, but unmistakably, impossibly alive. "Isabella?" The name came out as a choked gasp. "It's me, Daddy! It's really me!" John scrambled to his feet, nearly falling in his haste. He crossed the distance between them in 3 unsteady steps and dropped to his knees before her, his hands hovering over her shoulders, as if afraid she might dissolve at his touch. "This isn't real," he breathed. "You're not real. I'm dreaming. I have to be dreaming." Isabella took his trembling hands and pressed them against her face, her warm, living, tear-streaked face. "I'm real, Daddy. I'm alive. They took me. They kept me locked up, but I escaped. I'm here." The dam broke. John pulled his daughter into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. His body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. A sound of pure, overwhelming relief mixed with rage and confusion and desperate, desperate love. "My baby," he kept repeating. "My baby girl. Oh God, my baby girl." They held each other for what felt like an eternity, father and daughter reunited in the shadow of a grave that had been a lie. When John finally pulled back, his eyes were red and his face was wet, but something had changed in his expression. The broken man from moments ago was gone. In his place was something harder, something dangerous. "Who did this?" His voice was low and controlled, but Isabella could hear the fury beneath it. "Who took you? Where have you been? I'll kill them. I swear to God I'll kill them with my bare hands." "Daddy, Listen to me. Isabella gripped his hands tightly. It was Stella. And someone else. I don't know who, but I heard his voice on the phone. They're poisoning you. The medication you're taking, the tea she makes you, it's killing you slowly. They want your money. John's face went pale. Stella? That's impossible. She's been taking care of me. She's been killing you, Isabella interrupted, her young voice carrying a weight no child's voice should hold. I heard them talking. They said a few more months, maybe less. Daddy, you have to believe me. For a moment, John simply stared at his daughter. The girl who had left him 6 months ago had been sweet, innocent, sheltered. The girl standing before him now had the eyes of someone who had seen too much, survived too much, grown up too fast. He believed her. God help him. He believed every word. We're going to the police, he said, standing abruptly. Right now, we're going to— No! Isabella grabbed his arm. Daddy, we can't. If they find out I'm alive, they'll kill us both. They have people. The man who guarded me. He'll tell them I escaped. They're probably already looking for me. If we go home, if we go to the police, if anyone sees me— She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. John felt his rage collide with a terrible realization. His daughter was right. He couldn't simply expose Stella and her accomplice, not without putting Isabella in immediate danger. These people had staged a fire, faked a death, kept a child prisoner for half a year. They would not hesitate to kill again. Then what do we do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much darkness for a 9-year-old. But beneath the fear, beneath the trauma, there was something else, a spark of determination that reminded John of himself. We have to be smarter than them, she said. We have to make them think they've won, and then we have to destroy them. John stared at his daughter, this child who had survived the unsurvivable, who had escaped the inescapable, who was now asking him to fight the people who had tried to destroy them both. He knelt before her again, placing his hands on her shoulders. I spent 6 months wanting to die, he said quietly. I thought I had lost everything. But you came back to me. You survived when no one thought you could. And now you're telling me we have to fight. He pulled her close, pressing his lips to the top of her head. I won't let them hurt you again, Isabella. I don't know how yet, but I promise you. We're going to make them pay for what they did, and we're going to do it together. For the first time in 6 months, Isabella allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She felt hope. John drove Isabella away from the cemetery using back roads, his mind racing through possibilities. He couldn't take her home. He couldn't check into a hotel. Her face had been on every news channel for weeks after the fire, and someone might recognize her. He needed help from someone he could trust absolutely, and in his entire life there was only one person who fit that description. David Mitchell had been John's personal attorney for 20 years. They had met when John was still a struggling developer trying to close his first deal, and David was a young lawyer hungry to prove himself. Over 2 decades, they had built not just a professional relationship, but a genuine friendship, the kind forged through late nights, hard deals, and moments when John had trusted David with secrets that could have destroyed him. John called David from a payphone at an abandoned gas station, unwilling to risk using his cell phone. I need you to meet me, John said without preamble. Alone. Don't tell anyone. Don't ask questions until you see me. David, to his credit, didn't hesitate. Where? An hour later, David's car pulled into the parking lot of a closed warehouse on the outskirts of the city. When he stepped out and saw John standing beside a thin, disheveled girl, his face went pale. My God, David breathed. Is that— It's Isabella, John confirmed. She's alive. She's been held captive for 6 months, And the people who took her are the same people who have been slowly poisoning me. John told David everything. The kidnapping, the faked death, Isabella's captivity, the overheard phone calls, Stella's involvement. As he spoke, David's expression shifted from shock to horror to cold, calculated fury. "If we go to the police now, they'll contact Stella immediately," David said when John finished. "Standard procedure in missing child cases. And you're right. Without concrete evidence, it becomes your word against hers. A grieving widow versus a man who might be suffering from delusions brought on by trauma." "So what do we do?" John asked. David was quiet for a long moment, his legal mind working through scenarios. Finally, he spoke. "We set a trap, but it has to be perfect. One mistake, and you both end up dead." The plan took shape over the following hours. Isabella would stay at David's private apartment, a small place he kept in the city for late work nights, unknown to anyone except his accountant. She would remain hidden there, completely off the grid, while John returned home to continue the charade. "You have to act normal," David instructed. "Weak, grieving. Let Stella think her plan is working. But whatever she gives you to drink or eat, find a way to dispose of it without her knowing. And then? Then we gather evidence. I'll get you recording equipment, small cameras, audio devices. We document everything. And when we have enough..." David met John's eyes. "You're going to die." John understood immediately. A fake death. Stella and whoever she's working with, they're waiting for you to die so they can inherit. If you die suddenly, they'll rush to claim everything, they'll get careless, and that's when we expose them. It was risky. It was dangerous. It was also the only plan that might actually work. John knelt before Isabella, who had been listening silently throughout the discussion. "I have to go back to the house," he told her. "I have to pretend like none of this ever happened. It might take weeks, and you'll have to stay here alone, waiting for me. I know that's asking too much after everything you've been through." Isabella's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "I survived 6 months in that room, Daddy. I can survive a few more weeks if it means we win." John pulled her into an embrace, fighting back tears. His 9-year-old daughter had more courage than most adults he knew. He didn't deserve her strength, but he would honor it. "I'll come see you whenever I can," he promised. "And this will end. I swear to you, this will end." The following 3 weeks were the hardest of John's life, and that was saying something, given the 6 months of hell he had already endured. He returned home and resumed his role as the grief-stricken widower. Stella greeted him with practiced concern, her soft voice and gentle touches hiding the monster beneath. Each morning she brought him tea. Each evening she prepared his dinner. And each time, John found ways to dispose of what she gave him, pouring tea into potted plants when she wasn't looking, scraping food into napkins and flushing them down the toilet. He installed the cameras David had provided, tiny devices hidden in smoke detectors, picture frames, and electrical outlets. He wore a recording device under his clothes whenever Stella was nearby. And slowly, the evidence accumulated. He captured Stella on the phone with someone she called Mark, discussing how much longer he might survive. He recorded her complaining about the delay, about how she was tired of playing nursemaid to a dying man. He documented the small amber bottles hidden in her closet, labels removed, contents unknown. But the most damning evidence came 10 days into his surveillance, when Mark Harrison, John's own brother, came to visit. John had always known that Mark resented him. Growing up, John had been the ambitious one, the driven one, while Mark had drifted through life taking shortcuts and making excuses. When John built his empire, he had given Mark a position as chief financial officer, partly out of family loyalty, partly out of guilt. He had never imagined that his brother's jealousy ran deep enough for murder. But there it was, captured in crystal-clear audio. Mark and Stella sitting in the living room, believing John was asleep upstairs, discussing their plans. "The doctor says he's deteriorating faster now," Stella reported. "Another month, maybe 6 weeks." "Good," Mark replied. "I'm tired of waiting. Once he's gone and we get the inheritance, we can finally get rid of the girl too. She's a loose end. We'll deal with her after the estate is settled. For now, she's our insurance policy, just in case anyone questions whether her death was really an accident." John had listened to the recording in David's car later that night, his hands shaking with rage, his own brother, his own wife, conspiring to kill him and eventually murder his daughter, all for money. "I want to destroy them," John said, his voice barely controlled. "You will," David assured him. "But we do this right. We do this in a way they can never recover from." 3 weeks after Isabella's escape, John Harrison died. The plan was executed perfectly. David had brought in a trusted doctor, a man who owed John his life after John had funded his daughter's cancer treatment years ago. Together, they staged a collapse in the Harrison home. Stella called 911 in hysterics. Paramedics arrived and rushed John to the hospital. 2 hours later, the doctor emerged with the grave news. John Harrison had suffered a massive heart attack. Despite their best efforts, he could not be saved. The death certificate was signed. The body was cremated to prevent any awkward questions. And the news spread across the country within hours. "Black billionaire John Harrison dead at 45, the headlines read. "Real estate mogul succumbs to heart failure after months of grief over daughter's death." Stella played her role masterfully. She wore black. She wept for the cameras. She spoke movingly about her husband's broken heart, how he had never recovered from losing Isabella, how she had watched him fade away despite her best efforts to save him. Mark stood beside her at the press conference, his face arranged in solemn grief, speaking about the brother he had loved and lost. The public mourned, social media filled with tributes, and Stella and Mark began the process of claiming their inheritance. Meanwhile, in David's apartment, Isabella watched the news coverage on a small television, her father sitting beside her. "They think they've won," John said quietly. Isabella leaned against his shoulder. "They haven't." "No," John agreed. "They haven't." The waiting was agony. From his hiding place, John monitored Stella and Mark's movements through the cameras still active in his home. He watched them celebrate with champagne the night after his funeral. He listened to them discuss which properties they would sell first, how they would divide the fortune, what they would do with their new freedom. He also watched them grow careless. Without John to monitor, they spoke openly about their crimes. They called the guard who had held Isabella, a man named Ray, and instructed him to clean up the farmhouse. They discussed the timeline for dealing with Isabella once the estate was settled. John documented everything. David built the case, and the date for the inheritance hearing approached. For Isabella, those 2 weeks in hiding were a different kind of torture. She was safe, she was fed, she had a warm bed. But she was also alone for hours at a time while David worked and her father gathered evidence. The nightmares came every night. Dreams of the dark room, the locked door, the guard's footsteps. She would wake up gasping, reaching for a father who wasn't there, and have to remind herself that she was free, that this was almost over. But the fear never quite left her. What if something went wrong? What if Stella discovered the truth? What if her father's fake death became real through some terrible accident? She kept these fears to herself. Her father had enough to worry about without her adding to his burden. So she waited, and she watched the news, and she counted down the days until she could finally stop hiding. The inheritance hearing was held in the downtown courthouse, a grand stone building that had seen countless legal battles over its 100-year history. Media trucks lined the street outside. Reporters jostled for position. The death of a black billionaire and the disposition of his fortune was national news, and everyone wanted a piece of the story. Inside the courtroom, Stella sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in elegant black, dabbing at her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Mark sat beside her, his expression appropriately somber. Their attorneys had prepared all the necessary documents: the will, the death certificate, the proof of marriage and blood relation. The judge reviewed the paperwork with meticulous care. Everything appeared to be in order. John Harrison had died intestate regarding recent changes, and his wife and brother were the legal heirs to his estate. "If there are no objections," the judge announced, "I am prepared to authorize the transfer of assets to the surviving family members." Stella picked up the pen to sign the documents. Her hand was steady. Why wouldn't it be? Everything had gone exactly according to plan. John was dead. Isabella was hidden away, ready to be disposed of. And the fortune she had spent 3 years cultivating was finally within her grasp. She signed her name with a flourish. Mark signed after her, allowing himself a small smile. The judge reached for his stamp, and then the courtroom doors burst open. Every head turned. Cameras swung toward the entrance, and Stella's pen clattered to the table as the color drained from her face. John Harrison stood in the doorway, alive, tall, his eyes burning with cold fury, and beside him, holding his hand, was Isabella, the daughter everyone believed had died in a fire 6 months ago. "I think," John said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "there may be some objections after all." The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Spectators leaped to their feet. But John's eyes never left Stella and Mark, who sat frozen at their table like deer caught in headlights. David Mitchell entered behind John, accompanied by 2 FBI agents and a thick folder of evidence. He approached the bench and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I represent John Harrison, who is, as you can see, very much alive. I am also presenting evidence that Stella Harrison and Mark Harrison conspired to kidnap Mr. Harrison's daughter, fake her death, and slowly poison Mr. Harrison in order to inherit his estate. We have video recordings, audio surveillance, and testimony from the man they hired to hold Isabella captive." He placed the folder on the judge's bench. "We request that both defendants be taken into custody immediately." Stella finally found her voice. She leapt to her feet, her composure shattered. "This is insane!" she screamed. "That's not possible! He's dead! She's dead! I watched her burn!" "Did you?" John asked coldly. "Or did you just assume your plan worked?" He looked at his brother, who had not moved, had not spoken, seemed incapable of doing either. "You were going to kill me, Mark, your own brother, for money." Mark's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The FBI agents moved forward. One approached Stella, who backed away, still screaming denials. The other went for Mark, who offered no resistance, his face blank with shock. As the handcuffs clicked around Stella's wrists, she twisted toward John, her mask finally falling away to reveal the hatred beneath. "You should have just died," she spat. "You were supposed to die. This was supposed to be mine." John said nothing. He simply pulled Isabella closer, shielding her from the chaos, and watched as the woman who had tried to destroy his family was dragged away. The cameras captured everything. By nightfall, the story would be on every news channel in America. But in that moment, in the pandemonium of the courtroom, John Harrison felt nothing but the warmth of his daughter's hand in his. They had won. The weeks that followed were a blur of police interviews, legal proceedings, and endless media attention. Stella and Mark were formally charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Ray, the guard who had held Isabella captive, was arrested at a bus station trying to flee the state. He confessed everything in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing the final pieces of evidence that sealed Stella and Mark's fate. The story dominated headlines for days. Black billionaire rises from the dead to expose family betrayal. 9-year-old survivor helps father take down would-be killers. News vans camped outside the Harrison estate. Interview requests flooded David Mitchell's office. Everyone wanted a piece of the miraculous story. John refused them all. He had no interest in being a spectacle. The only thing that mattered now was his daughter. But even with their enemies behind bars, the battle was far from over. The wounds Stella and Mark had inflicted went deeper than poison and imprisonment. They had scarred something fundamental in both father and daughter, their ability to trust, to feel safe, to believe that the world wasn't full of people waiting to hurt them. The first night back in their home was the hardest. John had considered selling the estate, starting fresh somewhere without memories of betrayal lurking in every corner. But Isabella had asked to see her old room, and he couldn't deny her that. They walked through the front door together, and Isabella's hand tightened around his. The house looked the same as it always had, elegant, spacious, filled with expensive furniture and tasteful art. But it felt different now, contaminated. Every surface Stella had touched, every room where she had smiled her false smile, seemed tainted by her presence. Isabella stopped at the foot of the stairs, staring up toward the second floor where her bedroom waited. "I don't know if I can go up there," she said quietly. John knelt beside her, bringing himself to her eye level. His daughter had been so brave, braver than anyone should ever have to be. She had survived 6 months of captivity, escaped through the woods alone, helped him plan and execute the takedown of their enemies. But she was still 9 years old. She was still a child who had been stolen from her bed and told she would never see her father again. "You don't have to be strong anymore," John said softly. "Not with me. Not ever again. Whatever you're feeling right now, scared, angry, sad, it's okay. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Isabella's composure cracked. The tears she had been holding back for weeks finally broke free, and she collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing with all the fear and pain she had kept bottled inside. John held her on the floor of the foyer, rocking her gently, letting her cry until there were no tears left. He didn't offer empty reassurances or try to fix what couldn't be fixed with words. He simply held her, letting her know through his presence that she was no longer alone. They didn't go upstairs that night. Instead, they made a bed of blankets and pillows in the living room and slept side by side, the way they had when Isabella was small and afraid of thunderstorms. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't practical. But it was what they both needed. The healing came slowly, in small steps and setbacks. John hired a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, and Isabella began weekly sessions that helped her process what she had endured. There were nightmares, panic attacks, days when she couldn't bear to be alone even for a moment. But there were also good days, days when she laughed at something on television, when she asked to help John cook dinner, when she fell asleep peacefully without waking up screaming. John attended his own therapy sessions, though he told no one about them. He had spent so long being the strong one, the provider, the man who solved every problem through sheer force of will. Learning to acknowledge his own trauma, his own vulnerability, was harder than any business deal he had ever closed. But he did it. For Isabella, for himself, for the future they were building together. 1 month after the courtroom confrontation, John and Isabella returned to Oakwood Cemetery. The autumn had deepened since that day when Isabella had revealed herself to her father. The trees were nearly bare now, their branches stark against the gray November sky. Fallen leaves carpeted the ground in shades of brown and gold. They walked together through the familiar paths until they reached the small marble headstone that had haunted John's nightmares for 6 months. Isabella Grace Harrison, beloved daughter, forever 9. The grave was empty. It had always been empty. Nothing but a lie carved in stone. John had brought a sledgehammer from the garage. He set it on the ground beside the grave and looked at his daughter. "I used to come here every week," he said. "I would kneel right where you're standing and beg God to let me die so I could be with you again. This stone, this lie, almost destroyed me." Isabella reached out and touched the cold marble, tracing the letters of her own name. "They wanted to bury me," she said. "Not just in the ground, but in everyone's memory. They wanted to make me disappear so they could take everything from you. But you didn't let them." Isabella shook her head. "Neither did you." John picked up the sledgehammer and handed it to Isabella. It was heavy, too heavy for a 9-year-old to swing effectively. But this wasn't about effectiveness. It was about closure. Isabella gripped the handle with both hands, lifted the hammer as high as she could, and brought it down on the headstone. The impact sent a crack running through the marble. She swung again, and a chunk broke free. Again, and another piece fell away. John took the hammer from her trembling hands and finished the job. Swing after swing, he demolished the monument to his daughter's false death until nothing remained but rubble scattered across the grass. They stood together in the silence that followed, breathing hard, staring at the destruction they had wrought. Isabella spoke first, her young voice carrying a weight far beyond her years. "I wasn't born to be buried, Daddy." John felt his heart swell with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride in the incredible strength of this child he had raised, sorrow for the innocence she had lost along the way. He knelt before her one final time, taking her small hands in his. "And I will live to protect you," he said, "every single day, for the rest of my life." Isabella smiled, a real smile, the first one that had reached her eyes since before the nightmare began. "I know you will." John stood and took his daughter's hand. Together, they turned away from the shattered remains of the lie that had nearly destroyed them both. The morning sun was breaking through the clouds as they walked toward the cemetery gates. Behind them lay the rubble of a false grave. Ahead lay a future neither of them could have imagined just weeks ago, uncertain, scarred, but filled with possibility. They didn't look back. There was nothing behind them worth seeing anymore. This was not a story that ended with death. It was a story that began with the resurrection of truth.